He started testosterone and felt better than he had in years. More energy, better recovery, finally starting to build muscle again. Then his clinic made one change. They added a medication to lower his estradiol, and within weeks, everything reversed. His energy disappeared, his recovery declined, his libido crashed. And he came to me convinced that the testosterone had stopped working and he needed a higher dose. But when I looked at what had changed, I found something more important than a simple medication dosing error. No one had ever stopped to ask why he was tired in the first place. You see, he worked in law enforcement. His shifts constantly changed. His sleep was regularly disrupted by the demands of his job. His stress was high, and his training load was more than his recovery could consistently support. Those weren't excuses, they were clinical variables. But the focus had become one lab result: estradiol. It was flagged as elevated, he was tired, the two were connected, and an aromatase inhibitor was added to his protocol. But two findings occurring together don't prove that one caused the other. His fatigue had several possible contributors that deserved to be investigated. Instead, the number became the explanation. I'm Dr. Kelly Brown. I work with men and women on hormone optimization, metabolic health, and longevity. And here is what the testosterone conversation often gets wrong about estrogen. You see, men need estradiol, not incidentally, meaningfully. Estradiol contributes to bone health, sexual function, and body composition. And when it's suppressed too aggressively, some men experience fatigue, joint pain, mood changes, and impaired sexual function. But here's what makes this clinically important. Fatigue and low libido don't tell us whether estradiol is too high, too low, or even the primary problem. Those symptoms can come from several different places, which means that the lab result has to be interpreted alongside the testosterone dose, body composition, metabolic health, sleep, stress, training, and what's actually changed in a person's clinical picture. You see, when I repeated his estradiol using a sensitive mass spectrometry assay, which is the more reliable test for the lower concentrations typically seen in men, his estradiol was actually quite low. This was consistent with excessive suppression from his aromatase inhibitor. He had started with mild fatigue and several credible physiologic contributors that nobody had investigated. Then a medication was added before the cause of the fatigue had been adequately established. And that medication created a second clinical problem on top of the first. That doesn't mean that aromatase inhibitors don't have a role. It means they need a clear clinical indication, not simply a flagged number. So rather than adjusting his testosterone dose, we went back to the beginning. We reassessed the aromatase inhibitor and we adjusted the protocol. We built a more realistic recovery strategy around the demands that he simply couldn't eliminate: his shifts, his sleep opportunities, his training volume, and how much recovery his schedule could actually support. The goal was not to tell someone working an unpredictable job to simply sleep more or stress less. It's just not realistic. The goal was to understand the environment that he was actually living in and build a health plan that worked within his reality. As his estradiol recovered from excessive suppression, his energy improved. His mood, his sexual function improved, and over time, his body composition began moving back in the right direction. You see, the fatigue that started this had real causes, and once we addressed them directly, that improved too. Not because we increased his testosterone dose, because we stopped treating one number in isolation and looked at what was happening in his entire system. If your TRT was working and you began feeling worse after a supplement or medication was added or adjusted, I want you to ask these 3 questions before assuming that you need more testosterone. 1, when estradiol was flagged, did anyone investigate what might actually be driving your symptoms? Or did the number become the explanation? 2, was estradiol measured using an appropriate assay and interpreted alongside your symptoms, dosing, timing, body composition, and everything else that could be contributing? 3, Did your symptoms begin or worsen before or after the protocol changed? Because the timeline is often the most important clue. At Ember, every medication in a health plan has to earn its place. Not because a number is outside a reference range, but because there's a clear clinical reason and an honest assessment of that medication and what it's doing to the system as a whole. They treated the number. Nobody asked enough about his life. That's the difference between managing a lab result and understanding the person standing behind it. Subscribe, because this next video covers another area where lab results are often interpreted without enough clinical context, and that's testosterone in women. I recently saw a woman who had been taking testosterone for months. Her clinic kept increasing the dose, but she didn't need more testosterone. She needed someone to understand why the testosterone she was taking already wasn't working.